question is still out there, devoid of concrete answers, I would say...
Well, you know what, brother? If you want concrete answers, come to my channel. I'll give you some answers. But I suspect that you've come to many of the same conclusions that I've come to. You just can't say them on national television. Or you can't say certain things on national TV. So I'll say them for you. Colin Kaepernick was always a plant and an agent provocateur. And you could tell, I mean, if you just trace it back from the very beginning of his ascendancy to the start of his fall, all of a sudden he decides that he wants to initiate this so-called protest, and he receives all of this inordinate amount of attention from the mainstream liberal sports media. Then they send in the first MK handler, that being Nate Boyer, who helps Kaepernick recalibrate his tactics. And from then on, we hear about how important Nesh Nitty is to how the so-called protest is going. Then he's forced out of the NFL, and he goes 0 dark 30. We hear nothing from him. The only person who we hear from is his female Nesh Nitty, the same person who was brought over to the UN to speak to a delegation at the United Nations. Strangely enough, a so-called radio VJ.
Considering that, combined with the ratings that the NFL has been receiving, that the sport appears to be popular again and not distracted by these other issues, etc., the NFL is sitting pretty here today. Colin Kaepernick still doesn't have a job in the NFL. People aren't kneeling nor protesting, and they're barely even talking about the kind of issues that he wanted to bring attention to.
Because none of them ever had a plan. That was just another phase that Negroes were being put through. And so many of our people are simple, they fall for it. And they will repeatedly fall for it.
I'd say he doesn't look good.
Hold on, Max. I was part of these conversations with you guys when we had the story here on First Take that Colin Kaepernick had settled his collusion grievance with the NFL. In the wake of that conversation, there was all kinds of assumptions. Stephen A., you're absolutely right. You wanted to know the details. But we heard this is a win for Kaepernick. We heard that this is an admission of guilt by the NFL. Why would you settle? Why would you settle if you didn't have something? We heard there must be a smoking gun. The NFL didn't want to come out. And if this number...
Well, we've heard all that from that idiot Max Kellerman, or Marks Kellerman.
This number is true, Max, and I respect it. We got to know, is the Wall Street Journal correct on this? But if it's true that it's less than $10 million, all of those assumptions were wrong. Were they not, Max?
Will Kane love calling Marks Kellerman to the carpet.
No. And they weren't. I think, Stephen A., you have the right point. The confidentiality agreement is the troublesome part, because, or the troubling part, because...
Troubling for you, because you actually believed that Colin Kaepernick was sincere. What type of real revolutionary signs a confidentiality agreement, a non-disclosure agreement? The entire point of being a revolutionary is that you're going to speak the truth, or at least from your perspective. This person has not spoken anything for the last 3 years, Colin Kaepernick, and yet so many pro-blackity-black Negroes continue to believe that he's some type of hero.
You'd like to know these things, and in that way the NFL gets a win. But no, Will, it's not, because look at how easy it is to wag the dog. All you have to do is have something published in the Wall Street Journal that says, according to their source, Wall Street Journal didn't do anything wrong, they said according to their source who has been briefed about the agreement.
Max, the point is,
$10 million.
So now what you're trying to do is you're trying to allege that the Wall Street Journal is printing false information, but it's not really their fault because they're not privy to being able to verify it. That's what you're saying, basically, Max Kellerman, because you don't want to admit that there are many things that are rotten in Denmark about this situation.
It's true.
No, but
if the number that the Wall Street Journal is reporting is correct, don't you have to revisit all those assumptions?
You have to see it in larger scope. You have to put it in context. That is the point of this exercise. It is this easy to get people to just answer the question on a sports show. If this is true, didn't Kaepernick lose? People, especially who maybe wanted Kaepernick to lose.
My point.
Well, what's funny is that you guys had no problem answering the question of whether you thought he won when the news of the settlement first came down, particularly you, Max Kellerman. So now all of a sudden you have to parse out the question and reveal what it's actually about and whether or not it's meant to put you in a position where you have to admit that you were wrong. Just admit that you were wrong, man.
The point is that's exactly what was done when we came out here and reported there was a settlement to the collusion grievance.
Absolutely.
Grievance. You, in fact, Max, said it was a win for Kaepernick.
Ding.
Kaepernick. Why was it okay for you to speculate at that moment, but not today?
Because
when
what
we
you said
the
at the
Wall
time,
Street Journal reporting a number.
Because what you said at the time, what does it mean? I said that he's made millions of dollars, and he has. So even if it's 10 million, it's totally consistent with what I said at the time. And in fact, you and I got into an argument about how many millions, and this is millions of dollars. Now,
$10 million. I have Max. You know, $10 million is
I'm not
a
going to let you
wave of the hand by the NFL.
That's all it's about. And the fact that he would accept an amount that small truly shows that he was never truly sincere, or his sponsors were never truly sincere in the first place about what they claimed the protest was about. Because as I've been telling you, brothers, what the protest has always been about was to try to socially engineer the NFL into accepting many Marxist/Luciferian ideologies. They want to make the NFL similar to the NBA, that being a platform to push homosexuality, lesbianism, transgenderism on the masses, to promote that to the masses. That's why you're starting to see more homosexual cheerleaders associated with NFL teams, things of that nature. You're starting to see more females on the sideline for no reason whatsoever. That's what it's really about, or that's what it was really about. As I tell you, brothers, incessantly, none of these protests or so-called reformist movements are ever meant to benefit the so-called black man. They just use you as a foot soldier for these other demographics that they really want to shine some light on and assist in elevating. That being women, homosexuals, lesbians, and transgenders, not the so-called black man.
Will, you're someone who clearly was not on Team Kaepernick throughout the process, and now you're trying to frame it as a win for the NFL. And my point is,
how could it not be a win for the NFL? A multi-billion-dollar organization who pretty much was able to throw Kaepernick a $10 million check. And once again, he's not getting $10 million. He has to pay his lawyers, and he has to split the settlement with Eric Reid.
The point is, yes, it can be successfully framed that way.
Let me explain something.
No, I'm in the middle of talking. It can be successfully
recharacterize what I'm saying.
It can be successfully framed that way if you assume that the $10 million number is true. And
Stephen A. Smith, please jump in.
And my point is, think of how easy it is to get a win for the NFL in terms of PR here. All you have to do is have that printed in the Wall Street Journal.
Let's be clear, Max. I am not affirmatively saying that it's a win for the NFL today, because I am suggesting we have to know if the NFL's or the Wall Street Journal's reporting is true. But what I am pushing back on is the one person and much of the sports media who, in the wake of the collusion grievance settlement, said, win for Kaepernick.
Absolutely.
And you can't come out there to...
Once again, the Wall Street Journal is viewed as a very reputable source. I have a hard time believing that they would report that Kaepernick was receiving a $10 million settlement and they had no idea of whether or not that was a true number.
Today and go, well, it's also a win for Kaepernick when the number is so minuscule compared to what was projected and spent.
I cannot help what people. I cannot help what people project. I can say that in a settlement, it's going to be somewhere south of what the person could get were they to win a verdict, right? So a settlement's going to be somewhere south of that. Then the question is, if you get 3 times the loss over those 2 years, what is reasonable to project what Kaepernick would make? Kaepernick was not a surefire starter. So look at backup quarterback salaries and triple that over a 2-year period, and you get to some larger number than 10 million, but a settlement will be south of that, and 10 million sounds ballpark right.
No, it does not. You're trying to spin it and you're full of shit. Once again, $10 million is not going to Colin Kaepernick. The grievance, or the settlement for the grievance, is going to Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reid. Okay? So, Will Kane, Stephen A. Smith, somebody got to call him out on this bullshit.
Under those circumstances.
Okay, just to be clear, I'm sorry, Steve, just to be clear, you're saying a settlement less than $10 million minus 30% for contingency fees for the attorneys, split between Eric Reid and Colin Kaepernick.
Thank you, sir.
Kaepernick is a win for Kaepernick. Just to be clear.
Wait, Kaepernick and the NFL now have to factor in the contingency for the attorneys?
Well, one would think if we're speaking about how much money the recipient is set to actually pocket, that we would include attorney fees, Max Kellerman. And beyond that, I noticed that you have not responded to what Will Kane said about the money or the settlement actually being split between Kaepernick and Eric Reid.
Absolutely, when you're talking about how much money Kaepernick takes home.
Thank you, sir.
You just because math kind of is important here. You just said about $3 to $4 million for Kaepernick's a win.
Will, what's a backup quarterback's salary?
More than that.
What is a backup quarterback's yearly salary?
Ryan Fitzpatrick, what did he just sign for? I don't know, $10 million with
That's the top paid
one. Starter, though.
The average one is going to get several million. It'll be way south of 10 million. Maybe like 5 million.
Max, the fact of the matter is the only reason this argument has become convoluted is because you took it there numbers-wise. It wasn't about the numbers because you even said weeks ago, excuse me, if it's just for $10 million, you're not sure that will cut the mustard. But you was also pointing to the collusion element, and you did say before the case was settled that Colin Kaepernick had an argument and the NFL could be in some trouble. So you did say that. Number one.
Well, Stephen A. Smith, we have to remember that Max Kellerman does represent the super liberal faction, and they do have a penchant for hyperbole and trying to exaggerate how much trouble certain factions that they don't like are in. They're doing the same thing with Donald Trump. They've been alleging for the last 3 years that Donald Trump is very near being removed from the White House, that supposedly the Mueller report is going to contain some damning evidence that would justify Congress removing Donald Trump from the White House, and nothing has come to fruition as of yet. So it's very consistent what we see from Marx Kellerman. Whenever facts come out, they try to minimize the facts that don't fit their agendas. Once again, the NFL clearly has won in this entire situation, which I knew that they would.
Well, again, they settled because, again, listen, we got a whole bunch of cases in life where stuff just gets settled so it can get squashed and people can go on making their money while the person who filed the grievance didn't end up with what they were targeting.
Right.
Then you got to take into consideration. Here's where I am at. I'm not about the numbers argument that you and Will are getting into. I'm about the transparency element of it all.
Well, Stephen A. Smith, how is it going to be transparency when there's a non-disclosure agreement? I mean, what exactly are you expecting? If there's a non-disclosure agreement, and then on top of that, even before the agreement, Colin Kaepernick has not spoken about this issue. He has not really spoken about anything of substance for the last 3 years. What should that tell you about him, brother?
Did you capitulate to? If you are Colin Kaepernick, or what did you force the NFL to capitulate to? The fact that we are sitting here in the dark and nobody has known.
You in the dark. Speak for your damn self, bro.
Has known for weeks and nobody knows now what exactly the settlement entails. To me, Colin Kaepernick loses because the NFL has gotten to go away quietly in all of this.
Hey, if it walks like an agent provocateur and it talks like an agent provocateur, it must be an agent provocateur.
You didn't bring them to the forefront the way that your initial agenda was aspiring to do. That is my issue with Colin Kaepernick. We don't know anything.
I think you're right about the confidentiality.
Sometimes, Steve, the things that we know are based on what's in front of our eyes and not so much what we're told.
Agreement, because if one side leaks information that they know will get certain people in the press, but certainly largely the press, to take it as true and deal with it as though it's true, even with a qualifier, it may not be true. But if it is, let's spend 20 minutes talking about it. Then, of course, the NFL wins with a confidentiality agreement.
All right, we got to run from here.
Well, then, that means that someone should sue the Wall Street Journal. Because according to Max Kellerman, they're lying. They're putting their reputation on the line as a financial institution. When it comes to printed media, they're putting their reputation on the line to try to lowball Colin Kaepernick, according to Max Kellerman.
From here, we'll keep having the conversation. I'm sure it's going to not go away.
Well, what I think won't be going away anytime soon will be Colin Kaepernick. They're going to find a way to repackage him in some way. So we'll see how. So peace.